They were rude to me at the bank, but they didn't know that I own it. A couple of days ago, I had a shocking experience at my own bank, though they didn't know I was the owner. Usually, I don't share stories like this, but honestly, this one belongs on Reddit. Let me preface by saying that I'm not the kind of person who flaunts their achievements or status. On the contrary, I prefer to stay in the background, especially when it comes to my business. But this incident, all right, let me start from the beginning. I walked into the bank on Main Street to take care of some personal matters. Nothing related to ownership, just wanted to open a new debit card. The line was long as usual, and I was already preparing to be patient. When it was finally my turn, I approached the counter. The woman sitting there, Kristen, looked like her day had started with bitter coffee and bad news. I understand that working in customer service isn't easy, so I always try to be polite, smile, and not cause any trouble. But this time, things went sideways. Me. Good afternoon. I'd like to open a new card. Do you have time for that right now? Kristen looked up at me with an expression that made me feel like I'd asked her to move a mountain and said, "Can't you see how many people are waiting here? We don't have time for your, I'd like to. If it's urgent, take a number and wait your turn." It was unexpected. I stood there smiling, but her tone cut through me like a knife. I tried to explain that I had already waited my turn, but she just sighed in annoyance. "Yeah, sure. You think there's a special service just for you, huh? Just sit back down and wait." People around us started glancing over. I could feel something boiling inside me, but I decided not to make a scene. "All right," I said calmly and stepped aside to the nearest chair. But at that moment, I already knew I wasn't going to let this slide. Sitting on a chair in the corner, I pulled out my phone, pretending to be completely absorbed in the screen. In reality, I was thinking about how to handle the situation. I could have resolved it immediately. Just one call to the branch manager, and everything would have changed in an instant. But why? That would have been too easy. I'm not the type to solve problems by flaunting my status. Honestly, what bothered me wasn't the rudeness itself, but how it must have looked to the other customers. I want my banks, yes, I own several, to be places where people are respected, even when the staff is having a bad day. While I sat there listening to the noise of the branch, I started noticing little things. The woman at the counter was speaking the same way to everyone who approached. Her voice was loud, sharp, almost barking out instructions. Chris, the security guard by the door, was watching her with noticeable tension, but seemed to prefer staying out of it. Someone in the line whispered to their neighbor, "Not in the mood today, huh?" When I caught her eye again, she shot me a look like I owed her something. Funny enough, the thought crossed my mind. Does she even know what I look like? I rarely visit this branch, and most of the staff wouldn't recognize me. Kristen probably didn't know either. That gave me a slight advantage. I kept waiting, just like everyone else. An elderly man with a cane approached her next. His voice was soft, almost apologetic. "Excuse me, I'm not quite sure how to fill out this form. Could you help me?" Her response, dripping with irritation, almost made me jump out of my seat. "The form is right in front of you. You need to pay more attention. I can't explain the same thing over and over again." The room started buzzing with whispers. I saw the old man hang his head and shuffle away. My heart sank. That's exactly the kind of attitude I can't stand. People don't come to the bank to be humiliated. At that moment, I knew exactly what I was going to do. This wouldn't just be a conversation with the manager. No, I wanted this to be a lesson everyone would remember. I stood up, walked to the counter and said, "Kristen, I'd like to speak to your manager." Right now. Her eyes met mine again. I could see her roll them, as if I was just another annoying customer. "The manager is busy. If you have a complaint, fill out a form." The smile returned to my face. "Oh, I'm sure he needs to make time. Trust me, this is urgent." This time, she didn't answer. She simply turned and walked toward the office. I stood at the counter, feeling the tension in the room rise. Customers, the security guard, even the tellers at the neighboring desks, all were watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Kristen walked through the office door with a look that screamed, "Here we go again!" I waited patiently, leaning against the counter, catching glances from the customers. Some whispered to each other, while others openly stared at me. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife. A couple of minutes later, the office door opened, and out came Bill, the branch manager. I had seen him a few times at meetings, but he clearly didn't recognize me. Short, slightly overweight, dressed in a perfectly pressed suit and wearing a professional smile. He was holding a folder of documents, as if he had been in the middle of something important. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" he said as he approached. His voice was friendly, but there was a subtle strain to it. I smiled and extended my hand. "Good afternoon, Bill. We've met before, though you might not remember me. Let's step aside for a moment so we don't disturb the other customers." His eyebrows raised slightly, but he nodded. We moved to a small meeting table in the corner of the room. I noticed Kristen watching us from the office door, stealing glances out of the corner of her eye. We sat down. Bill seemed slightly unsettled. "So, how can I assist you?" he asked, opening a notepad to take notes. I looked him straight in the eye. "Bill, I'm not here as a regular customer. I'm here as someone who has invested money and heart into this bank. I'm your owner." For a moment, his face froze. It was that split second when his polite smile dissolved into pure disbelief. "What?" he asked quietly, as if needing to confirm he heard me correctly. I didn't drag it out. "I'm Eric Sanders, one of the primary shareholders of this network, including this branch. Today I came not in company business, but as an ordinary customer. And what I've seen raises a lot of questions, especially about the behavior of your employee, Kristen." Bill's face went pale, his gaze darting between me and the lobby full of customers. "Mr. Sanders, I had no idea. If you had notified us of your visit—" I raised a hand to cut him off. "That was the point. I wanted to see how things operate when no one knows who I am. And honestly, I'm disappointed." Bill quickly started explaining about their high workload, staff shortages, and his efforts to improve the situation. But with every excuse, his words sounded weaker and weaker. "That doesn't excuse rudeness," I said firmly. "Customers are the heart of any business. If they leave feeling humiliated or angry, then something is deeply wrong. And I'm not just talking about Kristen. I'm talking about your entire management system." Bill sat across from me, clearly feeling the weight of the situation. "I'm giving you an opportunity to fix this, Bill. But this won't just be a conversation. I want every employee to understand how important it is to respect every person who walks through those doors, especially someone like the elderly man I saw today." At that moment, I felt the atmosphere shift. The confidence of being in control of the situation gave me strength. Bill nervously rubbed the corner of his notepad. His face showed that he was scrambling to come up with a way to salvage the situation. The professional smile he wore earlier had vanished, replaced by a tense expression. I decided to soften my tone a little. Clearly, he wasn't prepared for this turn of events. "Listen, Bill," I said, relaxing my voice a bit. "I didn't come here to take your head off. But you need to understand, the culture of this branch leaves much to be desired. This is not what I want to see in my bank, and it's certainly not what customers want to experience." He nodded, agreeing. "Mr. Sanders, I understand. This is unacceptable. Let me handle this personally. I'll speak with Kristen right away. We'll conduct staff training." "Training is good, Aaron," I interrupted, "but this needs more than that. Respect for customers can't just be trained. It has to be a core value embedded in the way this branch operates." Bill nodded again, and I continued. "Today you saw how customers are treated when no one's watching. I need you to look at all of this from the perspective of someone sitting in the queue, filling out forms and being spoken to in a harsh, dismissive tone. Only then will you truly understand what needs to change." I could see my words starting to resonate with him. Bill straightened up and took a deep breath. "Okay, what do you suggest?" "First, Kristen, her behavior isn't just unacceptable, it's toxic. But I'm not one to advocate for immediately firing people. Give her a chance. Talk to her, find out what's going on, and offer her training. If she doesn't change, then you'll have to make a decision." Bill nodded, jotting down notes in his notepad. "Understood. Second, organize a meeting with the team. Tell them I came by. Let them know that even the owner can show up as just a regular customer. And most importantly, remind them that we're here for the people, not just for the numbers." Now his eyes lit up a little. He seemed to be catching on to where I was going. "And lastly," I said, standing up to conclude the conversation, I want to see results. In a month, I'll come back again as a regular customer, and we'll see what's changed. Bill stood up as well, still nervous but trying to maintain a confident demeanor. Mr. Sanders, I understand. We will do everything we can to fix this. I nodded, looking him directly in the eye. I hope so, Bill. Don't let me down. As I returned to the counter, Kristen was still there. She met my gaze with a mix of irritation and confusion. It seemed Bill hadn't had the chance to speak with her yet. I held her gaze for just a couple of seconds, then walked out of the branch. Outside, I took a deep breath of fresh air and smiled. This was just the beginning. The next day, I called the main office and requested reports on the branch on Main Street. Not the numbers, I could review those myself, but customer feedback, complaints, and performance evaluations. I had already heard bits and pieces, but I wanted to see everything firsthand. While I waited for the documents, things began to unfold at the branch. Kristen, as it turned out, didn't remain in the dark. Bill called her into his office immediately after my visit. She walked in, as always, with an air of irritation and mild arrogance, clearly expecting it to be just another routine conversation. Take a seat, Kristen, he began, setting aside his notepad and folding his hands on the desk. Is this urgent? I still have customers waiting, she snapped, not even bothering to hide her annoyance. Bill paused for a moment, as if gathering his thoughts, and then said, Do you know who that customer was? The one you were speaking to like that? She frowned. Who? Just some demanding guy? We get plenty of those every day. He leaned forward slightly, lowering his voice. That was Eric Sanders, one of the owners of our network. Kristen's face showed a flicker of confusion, followed by a faint shadow of fear. Wait, what? Yes, Bill confirmed. And he wasn't here as the boss. He came as an ordinary customer. Do you understand how that looked? Her confidence evaporated. She tried to respond, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. Eric has given me a chance to fix things, Bill continued, but you need to understand. This isn't just about you. This is about all of us. People should leave this bank feeling heard and respected. If you're not ready to work like that, say so now. Kristen finally managed to stammer, I was having a bad day. That's no excuse, I know. But listen, Bill interrupted. I'm not ready to write off your career just yet, but this is your chance to make things right. We're going to hold training sessions and start working on building a culture of respect for customers. You can either be part of that or... She understood the implication. I'm willing, she said quietly, though there was a hint of doubt in her voice. Bill nodded. Good, but understand this. I'll be closely watching your performance. The following week, changes began at the branch. The team went through several training sessions, learning not just how to speak politely, but how to truly listen to customers. Bill himself spent more time on the floor, observing the staff and occasionally stepping in to assist. And Kristen? She was trying. You could see the effort. Her tone became softer. She started greeting customers, and even occasionally smiled. But internally, she was still battling her own conflict. She was afraid her past behavior might ultimately cost her the job. Meanwhile, I received the reports. As I expected, there were more complaints about the branch than I would have liked. But there were also positive reviews, people praising the tellers who managed to remain friendly even in the most stressful situations. I decided I would return to the branch in a month, as I had promised. But not just for a visit. I was planning a surprise, a real test for everyone. A month had passed. During that time, I kept a close eye on the situation while staying behind the scenes. Weekly reports showed positive progress, fewer complaints, and customers noted improved service. Even Kristen's name started appearing in positive reviews. This was encouraging, but I knew that numbers were one thing, and the actual customer experience was something else entirely. It was time to return. But this time, I had a plan. Instead of visiting as a regular customer again, I asked my friend and business partner, Mike, to play the role of a difficult customer. Mike was a master at provocation. He could irritate someone with just one sentence. We agreed that he would visit the branch during peak hours, creating a tense atmosphere. I wanted to see how the staff would handle it, especially Kristen. The day arrived. I showed up at the branch a little earlier than Mike, dressed modestly, with no signs of being someone important. I found a seat in the corner of the lobby, pretending to wait my turn. The office already looked noticeably different. Bill was now personally greeting customers at the entrance, helping them navigate. One of the tellers, Jenny, was cheerfully explaining to a man in a suit how to open a new account. And most importantly, there was Kristen. She stood at her counter with a focused expression, but surprisingly, her face lit up with a welcoming smile when a woman with a child approached her. At first glance, everything seemed surprisingly calm, and then Mike walked in. He entered the branch radiating tense energy. His loud voice cut through the air. "Excuse me, is anyone even working here? I'm not going to wait an hour to get some help." The customers around him tensed. Some glanced at him in confusion, others in irritation. Bill looked up but didn't say anything, quietly observing the situation. Mike headed straight to Kristen's counter. "Hey you, I need to close my account right now. I don't have time for your paperwork." I could feel the entire room tighten. This was the moment when everything could either fall apart or hold together. Kristen didn't respond immediately. She looked at Mike for a couple of seconds as if trying to figure out the best way to handle him. Finally, she spoke. "Good afternoon, sir," she said evenly but politely. "Let's start by confirming your details. This will only take a couple of minutes." Mike rolled his eyes. "Details? What details? I already told you. Close the account and that's it." A flicker of irritation crossed Kristen's face, but she quickly composed herself. "I understand that your time is limited, sir. I'll do everything I can to make this as quick as possible. Let me get started right away." She began typing something into her computer, but Mike raised his voice sharply. "Do you even know what you're doing? Or should I ask someone else to handle this?" The entire room went silent. I was expecting an outburst, or at least a sarcastic comment from Kristen, but instead she paused, looked him straight in the eyes and said, "I understand that you're upset, sir. If I'm doing something wrong, please let me know, and I'll do my best to fix it." Her voice was so calm and professional that even Mike seemed caught off guard for a moment. The customers behind him began whispering. One of them murmured to another, "She's really changed." When Mike finished playing his role and left the branch, I stood up and walked over to Bill. We exchanged looks and I said briefly, "Shall we step into your office?" Bill nodded, looking as if he already knew what was coming. We entered Bill's office, and he immediately shut the door, as if wanting to shut out everything happening outside. His face showed a mix of tension and hope. "Well?" he asked, sitting down at his desk and folding his hands in front of him. I smiled, trying not to reveal my thoughts too quickly. "To be honest, Bill, that was, interesting. But let's break it down step by step." He watched me expectantly, without interrupting. "First of all, kudos to you for engaging with customers directly. That's immediately noticeable. People pick up on it when a manager is actively involved. It sets the right tone." Bill nodded, relaxing a little. "Second, your team has changed as well. Take Jenny, for example. She works with a smile and a clear desire to help, even in stressful situations. That's a big step forward." I paused to gauge his reaction. Bill gave a slight smile but remained cautious. "And finally, Kristen," I said, putting deliberate emphasis on her name. I noticed Bill tense up slightly. "Yeah, she's been trying—" "She succeeded," I interrupted. "Her behavior today was exactly what I wanted to see a month ago. She was calm, polite, and confident. Even with a difficult customer like my friend, she maintained her professionalism. This isn't just progress. It's proof that people can change when given the chance." Bill exhaled as if he felt relief for the first time in a long while. "Thank you, Mr. Sanders. Honestly, I was worried she might snap." "She could have, but she didn't. That means she listened to what you told her." I stood up, walked to the window, and, after a brief silence, added, "But you realize this is just the beginning, don't you? A single month isn't enough to fully change a culture. You're on the right track now, but if you stop or let your guard down, things will go back to how they were." Bill nodded. "I understand. We'll keep at it." I turned to face him. "Good. Then here's what I want. In 3 months, I don't just want to see smiles and politeness. I want this branch to become an example for the entire network, a place where other managers come to learn how to work with customers. Can you make that happen?" His eyes lit up. He stood up from his chair, extended his hand, and said, I won't just make it happen. I'll make sure of it. When I left his office, I felt the urge to check one more thing. I walked over to Kristen's counter. She noticed me and seemed to recognize who I was, as her expression became tense for a moment, but she quickly smiled. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" she asked, her voice confident but polite. I pretended to be just another customer. "I'd like to know about your terms for opening a business account." She immediately began explaining, laying out brochures in front of me and pointing out the best options for different types of businesses. Her tone was professional, with no hint of rudeness or impatience. When she finished, I looked at her and said, "Kristen, thank you for your help. You're doing a great job." She froze for a moment, then softly replied, "Thank you, sir. I, I'm trying." I nodded and walked away. Outside, I smiled to myself. Maybe I'd been strict, but sometimes that's exactly what it takes to give people a real chance to change. 3 months had passed. During that time, I hadn't set foot in the branch, but I kept an eye on everything remotely. The reports continued to be encouraging. The branch was showing the highest customer satisfaction scores across the entire network. Positive reviews about the staff, especially Kristen, had become the norm rather than the exception. But as any good leader knows, success must be tested. And the best test? Surprise. I decided to visit the branch unannounced, but this time I wasn't going alone. My brother Mark, who also held a high position in the company but wasn't as involved in day-to-day operations, came with me. Mark was my personal honesty gauge. He always spoke his mind and had zero tolerance for superficial displays. "Let's see how they handle pressure," I said to him on the way. "Are you sure they're ready for this?" he asked, smirking. "We'll find out soon enough." When we walked into the branch, the atmosphere was immediately noticeable. The space was tidy and lively. Staff behind the counters were interacting with customers in a friendly, yet confident manner. The queue was moving quickly, and no one looked irritated. We sat in the corner, blending in as ordinary customers. Mark was carefully observing everything, clearly looking for anything he could criticize. "Too smooth," he muttered. "It's suspicious." I chuckled. "Give them a chance. Maybe they've really turned things around." A couple of minutes later, we were called to a counter by Kristen. Her smile was genuine, but her eyes flashed with a hint of surprise when she saw me. She quickly composed herself. "Welcome. How can I help you today?" Mark decided to take the lead. He started making completely ridiculous demands. First, he asked to open an account for a company that didn't even exist, then added that he wanted to instantly transfer a large sum without providing any documentation. It all sounded absurd, but Kristen handled it. "Sir, I understand you want to expedite the process. To do that, I'll need a little more information. Let's start with the basic details, and I'll do my best to make this as quick as possible." Mark kept up the pressure. "What if I say I'm unhappy with your approach? Is it always this complicated here?" Kristen froze for a brief moment, but then calmly replied, "I'm sorry you feel that way, sir. My goal is to make this process as smooth as possible for you. Let me check with the manager to see if that helps." She gave us a slight smile before stepping away to find Bill. A minute later, she returned with Bill. He recognized me immediately and his expression shifted slightly, but to his credit, he didn't let it show. "Good afternoon, sir. We're here to help. What seems to be the issue?" Mark started explaining again, and I quietly observed. In the end, Bill and Kristen worked together to address every single point. Despite all the provocations, they remained professional and courteous throughout. When we were done, I stood up and looked at Bill and Kristen. "Great job," I said. "You've proven that you're capable of change. Congratulations." Kristen blushed slightly and Bill smiled. Outside, Mark said, "Now I see why you're so invested in this branch. They really are impressive." I nodded. "But this isn't the end. Now they've set a new standard, and they need to maintain it." After the visit with Mark, I felt like I could finally relax a little. The team had made incredible progress. Everything seemed to be going perfectly. But life is rarely that straightforward. A week after our visit, I received a letter. At first glance, it seemed like an ordinary letter from a client, but its content made me frown. "Dear Mr. Sanders, recently I visited your branch on Pine Street. While I noticed improvements in service, I became aware that some employees are still causing issues for clients. I thought you'd be interested to know that one of them has been talking about clients behind their backs. Details are attached. The letter included an audio file. I played the recording and my heart sank. On the recording, someone from the staff was clearly mocking clients, laughing at their stupid requests in a demeaning tone. The voice was male, which left little doubt. It was Bill. The next day I went to the branch. I didn't warn anyone. The atmosphere was still professional, but now I knew there was something hidden beneath the surface. I asked Bill to join me in the office. Bill, I need to talk to you. There's something that's been bothering me. He looked slightly tense but not alarmed. Yes, sir? Is everything all right? I played the audio recording. Bill's face turned pale and panic spread across it. His eyes darted around the room. This isn't what you think, he began. Really? Then what am I supposed to think? That's your voice, Bill. You're talking about clients, the very people you're supposed to serve. You're mocking them. You're undermining the trust we've worked so hard to rebuild over these past months. He tried to speak, but I raised my hand to stop him. You've done a fantastic job leading the branch through these changes, Bill. I'll give you credit for that. But this behavior is unacceptable. As a leader, you're supposed to set the standard. And right now, you're failing to do that. After the conversation, Bill left the office. I stayed behind, contemplating what to do next. Firing him would be the simple solution, but I knew I needed to think strategically. The next day, I gathered all the employees. I have something important to say, I began. We've achieved a lot. The Pine Street branch has become a model for others to follow, but client trust is a fragile thing. It only takes one person to break it, and we lose everything. I didn't mention Bill directly, but he stood at the back of the room, his gaze fixed on the floor. I expect each of you to not only perform your job well, but to respect the people who walk through these doors. No exceptions. As I was leaving the branch, Kristen approached me. Sir, may I ask you a question? Of course. She looked me in the eye, her expression serious. This is about Bill, isn't it? We all heard. I sighed. Yes, but I believe he can change. If he can't, we'll take action. The most important thing is that all of you understand. I'm here to support you, but I also expect professionalism from everyone. She nodded. I understand. Thank you for everything you've done for us. Another 2 months passed. The branch continued to operate steadily, and despite the incident with Bill, I decided to keep him in his position. I made it clear to him that there would be no second chances, and to my surprise, he saw this as an opportunity to prove that he could be a better leader. But I knew that before closing this chapter, I needed to ensure that the changes were not just superficial. To do that, I decided to conduct a final test, this time a real one, without any warnings, provocations, or games. I showed up at the branch on an ordinary weekday, disguised as a regular client. None of the employees knew who I was. No fanfare, no fuss. Wearing casual clothes and a baseball cap, I simply joined the line, waiting my turn at the counter. I observed. The staff at the counters moved quickly and confidently. Customers left with smiles on their faces. The atmosphere was light yet productive. When it was my turn, Jenny was at the counter. Welcome, how can I help you today? She asked with a genuine smile. I need to make a deposit, I said, handing her fake documents I had prepared beforehand to test her attentiveness. She took them and began checking them, but after a few seconds she looked up. Sir, I'm sorry, but something seems off here. Are you sure you have the correct documents? I can't process this transaction with this information. I pretended to be annoyed. Oh, come on, what difference does it make? Just take the money. Her smile remained, but her tone grew a little firmer. I'm sorry, sir, but we have strict rules. If you'd like, I can help you figure out the issue with your documents or call the manager to assist. I smiled. Excellent work. No need, I said. This was a test. Thank you for your attentiveness. She frowned slightly, but when she recognized me, her face lit up. Next, I approached Bill, who was standing nearby, observing his team at work. Can we have a quick word? I asked. We stepped into his office. Bill, I just wanted to tell you that today, you should be proud of your team. You've done the impossible. This branch has become exactly what I always envisioned it could be. Bill nodded, smiling, but his expression remained focused. Thank you, sir. But I know we haven't hit the ceiling yet. I don't just want to be an example for other branches. I want to be the best bank for our clients. On my way out of the branch, I stopped by the door and looked around. Kristen was helping an elderly woman fill out a form, Jenny was resolving an issue with another client, and Bill was speaking with a new employee, training him on the branch's standards. I left with a light heart. Sometimes all it takes is giving people a chance, even when it seems like they don't deserve it. And you know what? They can truly exceed expectations.